Hello there, folks. Welcome to another episode of Ask Away. I see a lot of folks in the chat who were also just there for the premiere of the Steve and Stuffy episode. So I hope everybody enjoyed the Steve and Stuffy episode that just premiered, and glad to see a bunch of you still here. And Phoenix, hi, glad you could make it. Phoenix has a charity link in the description of this video, by the way, if you want to help out with that. I'll mention that again at the end of the show, but since I just saw you in the chat, hi Phoenix. So yeah, as usual, I am going to ask everybody who is watching right now, who is in the live chat, complimenting me on my very phallic-looking microphone. Thank you, Adam. If you have questions for me or things you want me to talk about during the show, please hold on to them until I get through the pre-submitted questions from Patreon patrons. And when I get through that, then I will turn back to the live chat and I will answer questions from folks in the live chat. So if you have a question or a super chat you wanted to share or anything, just hold on to it, because I won't really be regularly checking the live chat while I'm going through the patron questions. So let's go to the patron questions, shall we? First question, actually, it's more of a comment this time from one of my Patreon patrons. It's from Kizzy, who says, "This isn't a question this time, but please, I want to shout out how grateful me and my NB SAF are for all the support you give to trans people. We live in the UK, and it is still hard to be trans. SAF is 19 and non-binary, but a lot of their friends are also transgender. All teenagers facing the stresses of growing up and being trans." Well, thank you, Kizzy, for saying that. And I wanted to make sure that I shared that with everybody, not to be self-aggrandizing or to toot my own horn, but just to say that I've gotten a lot of very kind and supportive comments from people, trans people and cis people, recently for me like making videos or putting little things into videos that have been trans positive or supportive of trans people, like just the Steve and Stuffy video that I just premiered, where it starts with Toby Benson doing the patent speech in front of the gigantic trans equality flag. And the thing is that stuff is so easy. It's so easy as a cis person who has no idea of the kind of discrimination and intolerance and often, unfortunately, violence that trans people have to face, and all the problems trans folks have to navigate in life just for being who they are. I have no idea what any of that is like. I'm completely unacquainted with all of that, and it costs me nothing just to send up a signal to let people know that I'm on their side, and I mean, it requires work on my part, too, because I have to be a good ally. I have to listen to people. I have to educate myself. I have to be willing to change if I fuck up, or, somebody calls me out on something or says, hey, what you said before is not cool, or what. I have to be open and willing to change my own attitudes and to audit myself and be reflective. And that's not necessarily easy. But doing stuff like just putting some trans positive stuff out there, and like really trans positive stuff, not just pretending that you're an ally of trans people while you spend video after video attacking them. That costs you nothing. So if you're someone who has a podcast or a YouTube channel or some kind of public platform, whether you talk about trans related issues or not, if you just take a second to let people know that you're on their side, that you have their back, that you're willing to change and you're willing to learn and you're willing to stick up for them. Because I think that means a lot to people. And it means a lot to me personally to be able to do that. So thank you very much for saying that, Kizzy, and for giving me an opportunity to say that just now. Next question is from Eric Byer, who says, Steve, I'm interested in your opinion about the canon surrounding Jean-Luc Picard's apparent departure from Starfleet in the upcoming television series Star Trek Picard. I think I've heard of that. We're led to believe this has to do with the destruction of Romulus that Spock tried and failed to prevent in the 2009 Star Trek movie. This was covered in much of the soft canon as well, including Star Trek Online and in the books. But what did any of that have to do with then Captain Picard? Or was there some other reason he left Starfleet? Thanks again for your well-considered insights into all things Star Trek. Well, thank you for saying that. I think if you go by what we've heard from Alex Kurtzman and other people who have sort of let slip little details about what the show is going to be about and the setting of the show, and also little things that were in the trailer and were in the teaser that preceded the trailer by a few weeks, where there's reference made in the voiceover to Picard commanding a massive rescue armada. I would assume that it went something like this, and we'll find out when we see the show. We don't know until we see the show, but I assume it went something like everybody knew that this incredible once in a lifetime supernova thing was going to happen, and it was going to destroy Romulus. So while Spock was over there doing his thing and with the ship trying to do the red matter thing and prevent the supernova, I imagine that Starfleet and other powers within the galaxy were descending on Romulus and helping to evacuate Romulus to make sure that if the worst did happen, that not all Romulans would perish. And I would imagine Picard had some role in that, and for whatever reason, because the planet was ultimately destroyed, because he made some decision that didn't allow him to get as many people out as he wanted to, whatever that specific thing is, he is now living with a great deal of regret as a result of that. But I think if I had to guess, I would say it probably had something to do with that Picard was there or nearby in some capacity when Romulus was destroyed, and he feels guilty about not being able to do more, or he feels emotionally scarred or traumatized by being a part of that event, and all of that, for whatever effect it had on him, he just said, you know what? I'm done. I'm leaving Starfleet. That would be my guess at this point. But of course, we haven't seen the show yet. We'll know when we see the show. Next is from John Burnsy. Okay, I'm old. I look at socialist countries like those in Scandinavia, and I understand that they are different from socialist countries like Libya and Venezuela. Everyone hates dictators, but we also hate leaders who are willing to drive their people over the cliff of ideology rather than admit they're wrong. Back in the early 90s, I remember being at a company seminar with an employee who worked in Libya. Libya claimed to be socialist, but oil tankers would leave Libya and head out around the world and come back with loads of goods for the people, meaning the leadership of Libya, but this process sounded like bartering or capitalistic to me. But in Venezuela, the ideological cliff is we can't pay for all of the things we could back when the price of oil was sky high, but we have to because we refuse to admit we're wrong. Living in Alberta, Canada, I know how the yo-yoing of oil prices can affect the provincial economy, but Canada has more than just oil reserves, same with the Scandinavian countries. This and lowering expenses can have an effect on surviving a drop in the price of oil recession. So, Steve, how would you explain to a socialist that when your country depends on one commodity, you have to adjust your thinking depending on the price of that commodity? It's not about ideology, it's about what you can afford. Or are the leadership in Venezuela not really socialists? See, a lot of this is probably outside of my knowledge area. These are things that I can't comment on with as much knowledge and confidence as you might want me to. I do think that there is a difference, a big difference, between the Scandinavian countries you mentioned that are very, very socialistic, but are also democracies, and places like Libya or Venezuela, which are essentially dictatorships. Now, there may be aspects of those economies, of those governments, that we can identify as socialistic, but I think their Achilles heel is the fact that, as you point out when you talk about, all the goods arriving to Libya that are supposedly for the people, that don't actually get to the people, that get to the leaders, that get to the oligarchs, that get to the people who are running the show. That doesn't seem like socialism to me. That seems like a dictatorship with some socialistic kind of policies in place, but that ultimately isn't there to benefit the people. It's there to benefit the people in charge. And I don't think that would be socialism. So I think that's the main difference. And yes, of course, if you tie your economy to a single product and your ability to sell that product at a good price, then yes, when the price of that product goes down, you're going to suffer a great deal economically as a result of that. But that would be the case if you were a democracy, if you were capitalist, socialist, whatever. Like if you tie your economy to a single export, and then that export's price goes in the toilet, you're going to have problems whether you're socialist or whether you're a dictatorship or a democracy or a capitalist or whatever. So I don't think that's the big distinction between the Scandinavian countries and places like Libya and Venezuela. I think it's the style of government. I think it's the fact that they are not free democratic societies who happen to be socialist. They are dictatorships. Is I think is the big difference. But again, not necessarily my best area of expertise. Here's one from Tom McDonald. I have heard it said that you sort of like science fiction and may have a special love for a certain sci-fi TV series. Something about a journey or a trek? In any case, do you have a similar passion for written sci-fi series with world-spanning themes and stories? I am thinking of older works like the Foundation trilogy and its sequels or prequels, or the mind-boggling time frames of the stories of Olaf Stapledon, such as Last and First Men and Star Maker. What written sci-fi is your favorite? That is such a good question, and I wish I had a better answer. My exposure and my interest in written sci-fi is not nearly as passionate and as extensive as my interest in film and television sci-fi, especially Star Trek, but other stuff as well. So I can't really say. I've read a little bit of Ray Bradbury. I've read a little bit of Harlan Ellison. I've read a little bit of Richard Matheson. I mean, but those are sort of like very mainstream writers. And like, I mean, you know, who the hell hasn't read some Ray Bradbury? Like, there's nothing really to say about that. But other than that, like, I haven't read any of the writers you mentioned in the question. I haven't read really any of like the major literary sci-fi franchises. You know, I've never read Dune or any Frank Herbert, anything like that. So I can't really say. Like, I've never really been super into it. My exposure to sci-fi for the most part has been film and television and a little bit of comic books. You know, and for comic books, I really like Challengers of the Unknown, which is a DC property that's kind of like the Fantastic Four, but has like a very sort of pulp sci-fi bent to it. I really like. I read some Challengers of the Unknown comics many years ago, like some of the original ones from back in the day, and then they did like I think Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale did a Challengers of the Unknown miniseries like 10 or 15 years ago that I read, probably even longer than that actually, probably 20 or 25 years ago. That I really liked. So yeah, but unfortunately I haven't really gotten into literary sci-fi as much as a lot of you folks have, I'm sure. Speaking of sci-fi, and speaking of televised sci-fi, David Colby is next, and he says, Babylon 5 is on Amazon Prime. And rewatching it, I was struck by how unsettlingly inaccurate it was. Like, in real life, we'd never have fascist anti-immigrant movements funded and supported by government institutions, backed by a president that stole their position by colluding with foreign enemies. So unrealistic. And this reminded me of when in high school, one of my friends refused to watch Babylon 5. He thought it was a Deep Space Nine ripoff and cited the Narn, who were, according to him, identical to the Cardassians, which on a rewatch becomes an appalling thing to say when you recall that the Narn were a peaceful agrarian people with a deep religious history, some of which is based on real interactions with godlike alien beings, who have just freed themselves from a century-long colonial occupation full of genocide, the destruction of their culture, environment, and governmental institutions by the imperialist Centauri. Centauri, who look like white people, as opposed to Bajorans, who look like white people and are nothing like the Narn at all, and Cardassians, who are weird space aliens and not like white people at all and are completely dissimilar to the Centauri. It's not like the Cardassians ever aligned themselves with the villains to regain their interstellar empire at any point, then pay a hideous price for it. Which leads to my question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how incredibly problematic that when Paramount stole the idea of Babylon 5 for DS9, they made the oppressed minorities more like white people with funny nose ridges, and made the oppressive imperialists as unlike white people as possible. P.S. Watch She-Ra Season 3. They ship Entrapta and Hordak, the mad bastards, and it totally works. Ah! I like that. I like that expression of whatever that was at the end. Okay, so I am not someone who is comfortable saying that DS9 was stolen from Babylon 5. I think that when people go through the similarities, I think there are definite similarities. I believe J. Michael Straczynski when he says he pitched it to Paramount at some point, and then later they developed Deep Space Nine. So I'm not willing to say that there was no like cross-pollination there. There was no borrowing or inspiration of ideas. But I don't think that Deep Space Nine was started or ever really was a ripoff of Babylon 5. Now, having said that, I do think your larger point in the question is a very good one. That in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the oppressed people, the Bajorans, were white people, and the oppressors, the Cardassians, even though they were mostly played by white actors, their makeup, their character design was not intended to be read as a white person, right? So I do think that you have a somewhat valid point. Again, I don't think that was intentional on the part of the people who designed the characters, the character designs for the Cardassians. I also have to mention, I'm not sure what the timelines are here. The Bajorans and the Cardassians were both introduced in Star Trek The Next Generation at least a year before Deep Space Nine premiered. I would imagine Deep Space Nine was well into development at that point, and it's possible that they introduced the Cardassians and the Bajorans on TNG knowing they were going to pick them up and make them a major part of Deep Space Nine. But I'm not positive on what the actual timeline were there. So I can't say that for certain. But yeah, the Bajorans being the oppressed people and being white, and the Cardassians being non-white people as they are presented on screen, I think that's a valid thing to notice. And yeah, it would have been nice maybe if they had done something a little bit more like Babylon 5 did, where the oppressors were white people and the oppressed were non-white people, as in the case of the Narn. But I don't, and it doesn't absolve the creators of Star Trek for doing this, but it illustrates probably an unconscious bias on their part. I think their idea was, well, we're going to make the Cardassians reptilian because they're reptiles and they're snake-like, and that's they're villainous. They'll read as villainous, and then we'll make them these really complex characters so that it'll sort of subvert that expectation. Like, I think that was the idea. I think that was the intent. But the oppressed people being white and the oppressors being non-white is still something that's there, and I think is something worth mentioning. But I'm not one of those people that says Deep Space Nine was ripped off from Babylon 5. Next question from John Brockman. So we finally take all the guns, melt them into a pool of molten death. Do we throw the Trumps in? I don't think we can throw the Trumps in. I don't think it could be that blatant. I think it would have to be... It would have to look like an accident, is what I'm saying. You'd have to convince the Trumps to show up for a photo op. Like, let's say maybe to lure Donald Trump there. Let's say that maybe there were some mass shooting survivors that wanted to meet with him, and they wanted to talk about how they think he's really totally gotten just a raw deal as president, and the mainstream media is full of haters and losers and nothing but fake news, and also they think that Joe Biden is an asshole or something. I don't know, though. Do something like that so Trump thinks he's going to meet people and have a good photo op and be flattered, and then he shows up, and then maybe someone just they leave like a traffic cone out, tipped over its side, and Trump doesn't see it, and he trips and he falls into the cauldron of the molten guns, and everybody's like, oh God. Everybody pretends that they're really upset, but secretly they're like, yes, something like that. You couldn't actually just throw the Trumps into the cauldron. Like, that's murder. You can't do that. But if circumstances just so happened to have arranged themselves so that a tragic accident occurred, and Trump and maybe even several of his family members happened to trip and fall into the cauldron of molten, melted down guns, well, that's really just an act of God. Like, who are we to argue with that? Next question is from Aaron M. Shuck. With the current rate of expansion in AI technology in mind, if you were in charge of things, how would you plan for a future without a need for human labor or thought? What metrics would you put into place to ensure humans were still relevant? Well, I think the distinction that is crucial there is, I would be all in favor of a future without a need for human labor, or at least without a significant need for human labor. I think some degree of human labor will probably always be necessary. But human thought, I feel like human thought would have to be a major part of the system. There would have to be human oversight. There would, even if we create an artificially intelligent system where most of the necessary tasks, like food production, transportation, power generation, distribution, etc., are done, manufacturing, etc., are all done completely automated and run by AI technology. I still think we would have to have some layer of human oversight on top of that, if for nothing else, to make sure that nothing goes wrong, right? So I feel like that would have to be an important part of the equation, not just, oh, the machines are smart enough to run it themselves. Let's just, let's just turn them on and let them go. We have to maintain some kind of control over that too, or else we have not learned any of the lessons that we have been trying to teach ourselves with science fiction over the last 50 years. We have learned nothing from the Terminator films. We have learned nothing from the Matrix films, right? You can't just let the machines take over. You have to make the machines really smart so they can do the jobs that we don't want to do anymore. But you can't just turn them on and let them go. You have to maintain some kind of control and some kind of oversight, at a certain level. So that would be an important thing to me. Human thought could not be completely removed from the equation. Next question is from Blue Eyeshadow is Logical. Do you have any plans for the Ensign's log once you get through all the TOS episodes? Are you going to do TAS or the movies? Or do a similar series for TNG? Just start making up your own plots? I know for a fact, or as much of a fact as I can say, given that we're still far enough away from it, that I suppose plans could change, that we are going to, when we're through with classic Trek, we are going to jump to the next generation. Me and Jason have talked about that several times. I don't know if and we have some very, very general idea of how we're going to do that, and of how we're going to get our characters from classic Trek onto Picard's Enterprise while still being ourselves and being able to continue the stories that we've been telling, continue as the characters that we've been like for the entire show up to that point. So we're definitely going to leap to TNG. I don't know if we're going to do the movies. I don't know if we're going to do the animated series. The idea of making up our own stories is really, really intriguing. And we actually, and I don't know if Jason has thought about that. We have never talked about that when discussing the show. So I don't know if that thought has crossed his mind or not. But that's a very intriguing possibility. But the problem with that is, I mean, I don't know what the deal would be with that in terms of copyright, in terms of fair use. Like now our show is an audio show, and that is sort of Paramount or CBS is sort of allowing audio shows to continue, in outside of their fan film requirements. And plus, I feel like we would describe our show as a satire, as a parody, and we would try to sort of avoid the rocks and perils of copyright law that way, because we are doing a spoof of the original Star Trek, and we're careful about mentioning names and mentioning, like intellectual property stuff. I mean, we try to do it in such a way that what we're talking about, but we're not presenting ourselves as like an official show of the franchise. But if we started writing our own episodes, if we started writing 100% our own stories with no connection to the pre-existing material, I don't know where that would put us, like legally. But creatively, it's a very, very intriguing idea. But yeah, we're definitely going to continue to answer what I think is the heart of the question. We're definitely going to keep going after we get to the end of TOS. We're going to jump to TNG. Next question is from Ahoyerno. Wouldn't Michael Worley be the perfect vehicle for that elusive 5 stupid things about feminism? Michael shout at the camera style, similar to a certain atheist that I can't find anything but amazing. You won't for obvious reasons, so this isn't a request or anything. I'm just imagining that armored one or the garbage human agreeing 100% with a parody of a religious nutter. Just a thought that makes me smile. What do you think? I don't think that Michael Worley is ever going to do a 5 things about feminism video in the style that I used to do them. But I do think that Michael Worley will be sharing his thoughts on feminism at a certain point. There will probably be a video at some point. I can't say for sure if it will be next year or what, because we haven't really started writing specific episodes yet for anything next year. But Michael is a misogynist. He is an anti-feminist. There have been little references to that here and there in this year's season. In fact, one of my favorite jokes, I think one of my favorite side text jokes from this year's season of The Whirlpool was something about Worley had apparently at some point in the past he produced a 6-part series about his divorce. And the title was something like "Why the End of My Marriage Was All My Wife's Fault and 0% My Fault" or something like that. And then the side text noted that it had been nominated for a Webby Award for Best Misogynistic Rant Long Form. And that's one of my favorite side text jokes that we've done so far. So he's definitely got some really, really shitty, terrible ideas about women and about feminism, and that will continue to come out. But no, he won't do like a 5-thing style video about it, but it'll be a Whirlpool video, and it will feature his quote unquote insights into the subject, I'm sure, at some point. And by the way, Dr. Babylon, I know you posted like a placeholding comment where you were going to put your question. I did not see a question there by the time the show started. So if you put a question up at some point before the show started and I just didn't see it, I apologize. But, I would recommend posting your question instead of just posting something to like save a spot and putting some numbers in it. Just post a question whenever you post a question. That way I'll be sure to see it and answer it. Anyway, next question is from Benjamin Fife. Hi, Steve. After the shootings this weekend, in particular the manifesto of the Texas shooting, I decided I'd step forward and give away as many copies of the audiobook Tempest Tossed, The Refugee Experience Through One Community's Prism by Robert Dodge as I could. I've given like 100 for the US and 100 for the UK market. Normally, I try to give them to people who I know will review the book, but at this point, it's just a message that needs to get out there. Evil must be opposed. If you or any of your patrons/viewers would like a copy, until I run out, I'm giving them all away. This is a message that needs to be read or heard. Maybe Stephen Stuffy could do a bit on refugees and immigration. Just a thought. If you or anyone else wants a copy, message me via my website, bennyfifeaudio.com, or email me at bennyfifeaudio@gmail.com. So there you go, everybody watching. If you want a free copy of The Tempest Tossed, you can contact Benjamin Fife at his website or at his email, both right there, bennyfifeaudio.com or bennyfifeaudio@gmail.com. And thanks, Benny, for doing that and for letting us know about that. Let's go straight to the next question. It's from Isaiah Taylor. Hi, Steve. So we've all heard of the recent shootings in both El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio. Once again, we are invited to the somber tragedy of yet another senseless gun massacre. And also, once again, we will likely be treated to indifference by politicians, notably Republicans, and to various extents, some parts of the American people. Also, like always, we debate the causes of these disasters, from the increase of hate rhetoric, mental illness, to, wait for it, video games. Obviously, we've heard this before, following the Columbine massacre, where Republican politicians like Jeff Sessions likened the attack to rock and roll in violent video games. This statement made me conclude that Republicans have this two-dimensional view on violence that wants to conform to their narrative. Conservative violence refers to violence that conservatives need to sanction, i.e. war, massive military spending, gun ownership, strong support for the military and police, and language that praises antagonism and division. Likewise, conservatives despise liberal violence, such as more lukewarm issues like profanity in music, sex, and guns in movies. The other topic of culture is, as you are a white male, why are so many suburban white adolescent girls attracted to anime, particularly the sexed up kind in Japanese culture? I follow a lot of cosplayers from America to Russia and every place in between who are obsessed with everything Japanese. Rather than cultural appropriation, this could be a form of white guilt. as the United States had done a lot of bad things to the Japanese people, i.e. the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese internment, various allegations of misconduct by U.S. military personnel in Japan, and the ongoing American presence in Japan from 1945 and on. It is my opinion that many whites see this as a collective shame, among other things, as something they should own. It's an interesting topic. Your thoughts? Finally, on cultural issues, what is behind, I believe that's supposed to say, the rise of incels, as I think in addition to the rampant misogyny and hatred of women, there are many men and women who are lonely, sad, and have never been touched. My question is, as someone who is lonely and never had a girlfriend, although I was never a misogynist, being raised by older white women, how do we help those people who are generally lonely and depressed about romance? And finally, what do you think of a Star Trek DS9 Yugoslav war crossover fanfiction? Essentially, Kira ends up in 1990s Earth, her lightship almost hitting the Mir space station and crashing off the coast of San Francisco, and seeing the Yugoslav war is similar to the Cardassian war, Bajoran occupation, and wants to ask the US, NATO to bomb Cardassian targets using the wormhole, and Serbian mercenaries fight alongside the Cardassian against Bajor. If this happens, Cardassia then prepares to invade Earth, and then that's when Captain Marvel, who is aiding the fight to defend Bajor and who is at war with the Kree, who are also fighting the Bajorans, shows up and kicks some Cardassian ass. But will she be a match for a demon-possessed paw-wraith Gul Dukat, who is like the Serbian war criminal Arkan? Your thoughts? Next time, ask me one question. I have a rule that I only take one question from everybody. And you kind of cheated, and you posted one post, but you put like 20 different questions in there. So I will answer each of the questions that you have asked very quickly. But next time, just one question per post per time, because there's a lot of stuff in there. The main question about whether or not there's a distinction between do conservatives draw a distinction between liberal violence and conservative violence, I think that's a really, really good point. I do think that it's very telling of the mindset of a lot of conservative people, that they are far more offended by perceived disrespect toward things they hold dear than by actual literal violence. The story that was just being shared around a couple of days ago of the man who fractured a teenager's skull because he perceived the teenager as being disrespectful toward the national anthem. And in his mind, I think he even said to the cops, he said, I had a right to do it. Like, I was justified in doing it because he was disrespecting the national anthem. And not only does he use physical violence against a child for doing this, but such physical violence that it injures him. It fractures his skull. And in his mind, that was completely fine, because not showing adequate respect for the flag or the anthem was enough of an offense to warrant a violent sanction. He had no problem with the violence that he committed. He thought that was actually completely justified and righteous. But the perceived disrespect to the anthem, that was the real crime in his mind. And I feel like there's a lot of that on the conservative side. And a lot of that also, I think, is very, very knowing, willful attempts at misdirection. I mean, I think there probably are some conservative people who genuinely think that Harry Potter books lead to witchcraft and that violent video games are more responsible for mass shootings than guns. But I think a lot of that is done intentionally. They want us to talk about violent video games. They want us to talk about mental health because they don't want us, whatever we do, to talk about guns. And they know that violent video games are not a major contributing factor to these events, but they don't want to talk about guns, and they don't want to talk about white supremacy, and they don't want to talk about misogyny and toxic masculinity and all the other things that go into feeding these acts of terrorism, these acts of mass murder. So shit, yeah, let's get people talking about violent video games. So it's part of it, I think, is the mindset and people just naturally following their biases, and part of it, I think, is extremely willful in an attempt to misdirect. As for why are people obsessed with Japanese culture, maybe you're onto something there. Maybe it is kind of an unconscious guilt. Maybe it's also the fact that we have especially in our culture that is very white oriented and has a history of empire and colonialism. We view Asia as an exotic place, and we are fascinated by the exotic, but also Japan in particular is very westernized and very much like our own culture, and takes a lot of influence from our culture. So it's simultaneously exotic and familiar. And that just makes it very intriguing and very enticing to people. And also a lot of people just think that anime is really, really good. Like the product itself is of a high quality in many cases and of a different style than a lot of Western animation. And they just dig it. It appeals to them for aesthetic reasons or for reasons of taste. And on the cultural issue, what is the deal with the rise of incels? How do we help those people? I don't know. I mean, if I could figure out how to help people who are lonely and bad at relationships, I probably would have been less lonely and less bad at relationships for much of my life. The key for me was meeting someone who I got along with and who liked me and who I liked, and that cured me of my loneliness. And it happened a couple times before that too, just not for as long of a time as this time. But how do you tell people, well, you just have to wait to meet the right person? Like, that doesn't help when you're in that situation. And your Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, Yugoslav War, Captain Marvel fan fiction sounds completely bonkers, but if you want to go for it and you think you can make all of that work and make sense, more power to you, my friend. One question next time, please. Next question is from Jan Beek from Willach, Germany, EU. Hey, Steve, I am from Germany, EU. Yes, I consider myself a European, not a German. And I am struggling with what my EU government, or better, the governments of the European countries, are doing about our immigration crisis. At the moment, their plan seems to be keep the people from Syria, Libya, and other countries of the Middle East and Africa just outside the EU, pay the countries holding these people prison. Yes, these poor souls are actually imprisoned in some countries, and keep the problem away from our own borders. And where this strategy fails, wannabe neo-Nazis, like the Italian Secretary of State, orders his own coastal guards to not land in an Italian harbor because they rescued 139 people from the waters of the Mediterranean Sea who would have died otherwise. Italy is planning to establish a new law saying it is a crime to bring quote-unquote illegal people into Italy, meaning every captain of a ship applying to the maritime law about rescuing people who are in distress at sea will be held accountable for that and risk a fine up to several million euros or even prison. Truth is, we do not have a migration crisis. It is what people want us to believe to avoid focusing on more important tasks like climate change, etc. But the numbers of the few are still coming have actually dropped, but at what price? Dead people in the sea on a daily basis, losing everything that the morals of the EU stood for after the Second World War. So basically, due to the EU not having a real central government and the rise of more and more extreme right-wing parties all over the EU, I guess my question is it just inevitable after 70 plus years of peace in Europe that people forget what it means to be human and help each other, and sharing our wealth will help us grow? Because sometimes I am really asking myself if humanity needs an era of violence and destruction to find back to the best in itself. Sad thought, isn't it? Cheers, Jan. Yeah, that is a sad thought. I don't necessarily know if I would put it in those terms, if I would say, we need an era of violence to remember our virtues. But that does seem to be the way of history. That seems to be the cycle. We survive some horrific catastrophe, and we say, never again, and we're changing things, and we're going to take care of each other this time, and we're going to rebuild, and we're going to change things. And we do that for a while, and a lot of progress comes out of that, and then eventually we backslide. And that builds up, and then another violent thing happens, and then we start all over again. We say, oh, we can't let this happen again. And, and unfortunately, I think that's just the way it goes. It's not inevitable, but it would require vigilance. It would require succeeding generations to continue to think of those things as being as important and as urgent as the generation that lived through the Second World War, for instance. And the further you get away from the living memory of that event, the less it means to people. People who were not alive, or at least not aware of the world at the time 9/11 happened, it just doesn't mean as much to them as it does to me, or people who lived through it. Just like Pearl Harbor doesn't mean as much to me as it meant to my grandfather. It's just natural. But that is a hindrance in not only making progress, but preserving the progress that was made. The migrant crisis in Europe, in certain very broad ways is a lot like the migrant crisis in the United States, because the people making the policies are focused on keeping people out. You know, they're not focused on helping people. The Trump administration doesn't care about helping people, doesn't care about our responsibility to refugees, to migrants, to people who are coming seeking asylum, trying to escape a terrible situation. They don't care about those people. They see those people as an obstacle, you know, as a threat. And their policies are built around keeping them out and discouraging them from coming in the first place. And it sounds like those are the principles behind a lot of the policies in the countries that you describe. Well, just keep them outside the EU. Don't let them in. Just keep them outside. We'll pay you to keep them out. You know, instead of saying, my God, they need help, let them come in, let us help them, which is what should be the attitude. But yeah. Anyway, next question. It is a sad thought. Next question from Crystal of Truth. Hi, Steve. Do you think Jellico will be captaining the Enterprise in the Picard series? Will Admiral Riker have assigned him a Cardassian as his second? How many lights will his desk have? Do you have any Lego? Keep it up, good sir. Well, no, I don't think I have any Lego at the moment. I played with Legos when I was a kid, before Lego was like such a huge thing like it is now. But no, I don't have any Lego at the present time. I've looked into getting like Star Trek Lego, but apparently Lego is not a licensee for Star Trek. They do all the Star Wars stuff, but they don't do Star Trek stuff. There's other like Lego type block toys that have Star Trek sets. But they're really expensive. So no, I don't have any Lego stuff. No, I do not think Jellico will be the captain of the Enterprise in the Picard series. I don't expect we will see or hear from Jellico in the series. But that is a really funny idea of Admiral Riker outranking Jellico and taking his revenge by assigning him a Cardassian first officer. But no, I don't expect to see that. But that is a funny idea. Matthew Rick, you have to choose one of the following options. I mean, not really, but hypothetically, say you need to choose from one of the following options. Number one, you sit through Zardoz again, and then there is a footnote that says, nota bene, your viewing of Zardoz would take place in the White House screening room, where you will attempt in vain to explain the movie to Trump. Pence will sit in the back corner, outwardly disgusted, but inwardly turned on by the gratuitous nudity and misogyny of the film, but no hamburgers will be offered. And then number two is, you visit the White House, where you sit in the Oval Office for 1 hour, 47 minutes, the runtime of Zardoz, and listen to Trump talk about how great he is for the entire time. He will continually offer you hamburgers, even after you have explained 5 times that you are a vegetarian. Which do you choose? That is so easy. I think you designed that to be kind of a difficult one, but that is so easy. I will pick watching Zardoz and trying to explain it to Trump. Or listen, or trying to get him to understand what's going on. I will take that over just sitting in the White House and listening to Trump flap his jaws for an hour and a half. Easy, because at least I've got Zardoz to distract me. And yes, I thought Zardoz was a terrible movie, but anything that dilutes the experience of spending time with Donald Trump is something that I will vastly prefer over spending time with him without anything to dilute that or to break that up. So I'm going with option one. If I have to choose one of them, I'm going with option one. Here's one from General Contact Unit Problem Child. Those jokes Reagan made in that recording, do you think it's fair to say that those kinds of remarks would have been viewed as acceptable by the vast majority of 60-year-old white guys living in 1971, i.e. regardless of political affiliation? If so, if it is indeed the case that all the old white dudes were saying racist shit in 1971, I can't help but feel it's kind of fallacies or fallacious to infer that him making those remarks has anything special to do with him later in life backing policies that were designed to hurt people of color. I mean, LBJ said racist shit all the time in private, and he got the Voting Rights Act passed. When we're looking into formative years of history's great monsters, i.e. like Reagan, and looking for signs of what was to come, I think we need to differentiate between signs they were uniquely shitty people and them just seeming uniquely shitty to us because the past was an overall shittier time. Well, that's a good point. I think the only reason that I would stress Reagan's racism in that recording is if someone tried to say that he wasn't racist. Like, I agree with you. I do think that the attitudes that Reagan expresses in that recording were much more acceptable in 1971 than they are today. Although I would note, even in 1971, Reagan wasn't saying that kind of shit in public. He still was saying it in private, and I'm sure felt like he could not say that kind of thing in public if he wanted to still have the career that he wanted to have. But yeah, I do think it's fair to say that the culture was as racist as it is now, that the culture was at least a lot more overtly racist back then, and that Reagan's sentiments were more acceptable. But I would point out that they are still racist if someone would try to argue, as many people defending Reagan did try to argue, that he wasn't racist. And that him saying that sort of thing should not be taken as evidence that he is racist. I would point out not only what he said in that Nixon tape, but also what I said in the video. The fact that he escalated the war on drugs, which had a disproportionately negative effect on communities of color, that he supported apartheid regimes in South Africa and Rhodesia, that he helped to popularize the stereotype of black mothers as welfare queens. I point to all of that as evidence that he was a racist person. Whether he was racist as an average amount for people of his generation or not isn't really the point. The point is people are saying, oh, he wasn't racist. And clearly he was. So, but I think your point is very good, that we shouldn't view him as uniquely terrible. But if someone tries to argue that he wasn't terrible at all, or he wasn't racist, I think you need to answer that. Yeah. Next question is from Andrew C. Hawkins. When it comes to boys, especially white boys, how do we flip the narrative from you can do anything to we can do anything if we help each other? And then have the opening guitar lines of Joe Cocker's version of With a Little Help from My Friends come on in the background. Well, I think the best way to do it for boys, for young people, is just to model it. Is to set an example, to let them see through if you're a parent or an adult that is in sort of a mentor role or have young people that look up to you, model that behavior for them. Let them know that helping each other, that cooperation is very important, that it's not just about what you can do and what you can get for yourself. It's about what we can all do together. I think modeling that and setting that as the expectation, as the standard in the minds of someone who is at a very formative age is super important. So that would be my advice, is just in whatever way you can in your life, when you interact with younger people, whether it's as a parent or as a mentor or a teacher or whatever, try to model that for them. Try to teach them young that's how they should be, that they should focus on what we can do together, not how far ahead of the other guy can we get. Next question from Lynn Simpson. What's up with the Ferengi? Are they coded as Jewish? What is their narrative purpose in Trek? I would love to see an episode of Trek actually devoted to them. Thanks, Steve. Well, sure. The Ferengi are mentioned in the next Trek Actually episode, the one about the economics of Star Trek, but the video is not all about them. They just are mentioned a little bit. Just like with the Cardassians, I don't think the Ferengi are intentionally coded as Jewish, but I think they can be read that way, and I think that's unfortunate. I think a lot of the behavior and a lot of the sort of characteristics of Ferengi presented in Star Trek unfortunately line up with a lot of anti-Semitic stereotypes. And again, I don't think that's intentional, but I think it's there, and I think it's worth mentioning and certainly worthy of notice. And their narrative purpose is to be, first of all, to be comic villains, to provide comic relief, and to be bad guys, but not bad guys that are as seriously threatening as someone like the Dominion or the Borg or the Cardassians or something like that. And also, they are a satire of 20th century capitalism. They are a satire of Wall Street. They are a satire of people who follow the profit motive to the exclusion of everything else. They're a satire of us, basically, of our society. That's their thematic purpose, and to an extent their narrative purpose as well. They're making fun of us. They are the Star Trek writers and producers' way of making fun of 20th and 21st century American capitalism. Next question is from neo-normie nemesis to classical liberals. What do you eat And you should experiment with shaving. Maybe go with a mustache. What is the diet of a Shives? As you lost lots of weight from your 2009 videos where you looked like the Brooklyn Brawler. Was that due to marriage? As I eat more sensible when I'm in relationships, less ice cream or 4 cans of baked beans and bacon, more meat, potatoes, or pasta. Can you remember what you ate when you were single that you wouldn't touch today? It's not so much that I don't think it had anything to do with me getting married. And especially like the dietary changes and me losing some weight from earlier in my YouTube career, because my wife and I were together and living together before I made my first YouTube video. Like there are no YouTube videos of me before my wife and I were together, because we were together for years before we actually got married. So it had nothing to do with that. A lot of it, I think, was going vegetarian. I'm a vegetarian. I'm not a vegan, but I'm a vegetarian, and that certainly helped with my health. And that was an ethical thing and a cost thing, and and a health thing to a degree. Like I never sat down and said I'm going to lose weight, but I did want to eat better and be healthier, and that was a byproduct of it. A very happy byproduct of it. I was glad. You just feel better. You just feel better. I never felt like I was in poor health, but you just you carry less weight and you feel better. You have more energy, etc., etc. I don't think I was ever quite Brooklyn Brawler proportions, and I think maybe Mr. Lombardi would be a little insulted by that, because he the Brooklyn Brawler was one of the great jobbers to the stars ever. I don't know if I want to compare myself to him in terms of looks or in any other way. But no, and in terms of things I ate back then that I wouldn't eat now, other than meat products, which I would avoid because I'm a vegetarian, it's mostly just a matter of portion and frequency. I used to eat a lot of fast food. I eat fast food very rarely now. I used to go, there's a convenience store chain in this region called Sheets where you can order food. And I used to eat Sheets like every week, sometimes every day. And there are still things at Sheets that I could eat that would be permissible to my vegetarian diet that I could get more often than I do. And I just don't, because I think it's better just to not eat so much processed food. So yeah, I eat a lot of salads. We make like soups and stews here at home that we eat. I make sandwiches that are vegetarian in nature. And every once in a while, I might treat myself to going to Burger King and getting a veggie burger or getting a veggie sub from Sheets. Or just the other day, I got the Burger King is selling for a limited time the Impossible Whopper, which is a meatless Whopper. I tried one of those and I thought it was really good. And whenever they have one on the menu, because it's just a limited time thing, whenever they have one, if I feel like Burger King, I might get one, but that's not going to be like a major part of my diet. But yeah, it's just a matter of deciding to eat less and deciding to eat better, for my health. And so I would feel better. Next question is from M. Greenwood. Hi, Steve. I've really been enjoying your Atheist Reads series, especially your commentary on C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. As someone who is interested in religion as a social phenomenon, I was wondering if, as an atheist, you have a different response to someone like Ray Comfort, who apparently can't string a coherent sentence together, and a trained theologian like N.T. Wright, who I also see in your Atheist Reads playlist, though I haven't watched your response to him yet. You obviously are going to disagree with their conclusions, but does one amuse you more, make you more angry, or make you think a bit harder than the other? Or is there a difference at all? Thanks. Have a great week, M. Greenwood. Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, there is a difference. I would not point to N.T. Wright as an example of the difference, although I do remember his work did not exasperate me nearly as much as Ray Comfort, but I don't remember being particularly impressed by N.T. Wright's book either. But C.S. Lewis's books, I did enjoy. I did Mere Christianity, and then for one of my last Atheist Read series, I did the Screwtape Letters, and they are head and shoulders my favorite books that I did in that series, both as pieces of writing, because Lewis was actually a competent writer, unlike pretty much everybody else that I reviewed, and I think their pitch, was a lot more acceptable to someone like me. It was not quite as strident as a lot of them are. And yeah, it was just by orders of magnitude less full of shit than Ray Comfort is. So yeah, there is a difference. There is a difference. But for me, as someone whose education is in English, a lot of it for me personally comes down to: are they a good writer? Are they a good communicator? How are they approaching it? How are they treating their audience? Are they being disingenuous to their audience? Are they pretending to do one thing when they're actually doing another, which is what a lot of apologists do. They pretend that they are writing to a non-believing audience, trying to convince them, when really what they're actually doing is just patting the believers on the head and letting them know that it's okay, that they're right. And that always left kind of a bad taste in my mouth. So yeah, but yes, depending on the writer, depending on the style, the how I respond to their writing, yes, there are definitely differences between the books. There are certainly some that I enjoyed a lot more than others. Next question is from Francois Lacombe. Here's a happy little question to lighten the mood. What, if anything, would you sell your soul for? No, I'm not looking to buy. Oh boy, what would I sell my soul? I mean, since I don't believe I have one anyway, I would be kind of like, I would be like Bart Simpson in that classic Simpsons episode where he sells his soul to Milhouse, and he's like, yeah, sure, you want my soul? Here you go, take it. What do I need it for? Except I don't think I would have the crisis of conscience that Bart has later in the episode. I would be okay with it. So I mean, I maybe I would sell my soul for a donut, like like Homer Simpson does in one of the Halloween shows. My frame of reference for this is very Simpson centered. Which I'm sure says something about me. Yeah, I would sell my soul for, if someone walked up and said, "Hey, you want you want a free Krispy Kreme donut? All it'll cost you is your soul." I'd be like, "Shit, yeah, that's a trade, buddy." Yeah. Next question is from some random geek. Okay, I have a lot of questions to ask you, Steve, because there are so many things I want to respond to. Like how in the last Ask Away, a patron of yours said that overpopulation is a major problem, which is a big eugenics dog whistle. Or how about another patron thinks sectarianism led to Spain being a fascist state during the Spanish Civil War, completely ignoring the revolution of the Spanish anarchists in Catalonia from 1936 to 1939, who thrived despite all the odds stacked against and only ended after receiving zero international help while the Spanish fascists got all of it. Step Back History did a great video on it for a primer, and there's the link, and that video is also linked in the description of this video for anybody watching who wants to check out that Step Back History video. And then John Burns asked about socialism, saying socialist countries like those in Scandinavia different from socialist countries like Libya, Venezuela. That makes me want to scream, socialism is the workers owning and controlling the means of production. And if the workers of those countries don't control the means of production, then it's not socialism. Plus, socialist countries is an oxymoron. Then there is the guns thing and my thoughts about it and possible solutions to it, if any. But I will save all that for another time for future questions. Instead, I will use my Ask Away space to say that, once again, our friend and comrade Phoenix of the channel Phoenix Rising 87, and there's a link to Phoenix's channel, needs a lot of money to avoid going homeless in a week or so. She has a new PayPal pool for everyone to share around here, and there's the link, and that is also linked in the description of this video for anyone who wants to help Phoenix out. Everyone, please give if you can. I understand that money is tight for everyone. Everyone is pretty much broke, which is why there is no left equivalent of the Tea Party. The left is pretty much broke. We don't have billions of dollars to create a whole movement. Thank you, capitalism. Remember, people, everyone deserves food, a home, water, healthcare, education, utilities, and even the internet. No debate. And capitalism's dismissal of these human rights for profit, killing millions yearly, is a barrier to this that must end. Why did it take me into my 30s to realize that restricting people from access to food, shelter, healthcare, etc. is a form of violence? Steve, when was it when you realized that restricting people from access to food, shelter, healthcare, etc. is a form of violence? And finally, thoughts on the idea of doing a charity live stream for Phoenix and doing it as part of moving towards a better atheism. That is a good idea. I think maybe we should talk about doing that at some point in the near future. I know I near future being a relative term, because Phoenix, I know you need the money really, really soon. But it's for the meantime, everybody, please go check out that fundraising page. The PayPal link is in the description, and please donate to that or share that with other people if you can't afford to contribute yourself, and try to help our friend Phoenix out if you possibly can. And how old was I when I realized? I don't remember how old I was when I started associating it with a form of violence, but I think I was relatively young when I became aware of the injustice of it. And it was probably a Star Trek thing, to be honest. I mean, I probably saw something in Star Trek that made mention of how people on Earth, at least in Star Trek, have their basic needs taken care of. They don't need to work to pay for a roof over their heads or clothes or food or education or health care or anything. Like, all of that is just taken care of. That's just considered your birthright. You know, that's your starting point. That's your floor. And then you build on top of that instead of having to pay for all that stuff. And when I noticed that that was not the way things are in the real world, and that there was really no reason for that. Like, there's no advantage. Yes, and there's certainly no advantage for the poor in the system we have now. Like, the advantages all go to the rich people, and they're all the ones that are invested in keeping it like this. The poor, and not even. I mean, especially those who are in the direst poverty, but even people who are just working people who struggle to make ends meet. Like, there's nothing in it for them. It would be much better for them if they didn't have to worry about trading the wages that they earn on their labor for basic necessities like food, water, clothing, shelter, and healthcare. Like, that would there's no, as you say in your question, there's no debate. And I think I was relatively young when I noticed that, and when I sensed the injustice of that. Here's one from Joe McClory. Can you think of the last time that a piece of fiction you read or watched notably affected the course of your life? If so, what was it and how? That is a great question. I can't remember the last time. I just described one time in my answer to that last question, which is, you know, how watching Star Trek was part of what helped me to realize the economic injustice that people face and why that's not fair and why there's no reason why we should be fighting to preserve that. So that's one. I did a whole video last year, I think, about how much of my life is an indirect result of me being a Batman fan. And you could just go down the list. There's so many things in my life that are important to me that are there because I was a Batman fan. Like, I first became interested in writing in middle school when I wrote Batman fan fiction. My first serious relationship was with someone who I met because we were mutual Batman fans. And we actually got to know each other and kind of fell in love, like trading fanfic, you know? So, I mean, Batman, you know, no specific work, but just Batman in general is another one. What's the last time? I can't really remember what the last time was. But Star Trek and Batman are two sort of categories of fictional works that have had a huge influence on how my life has gone. Here's one from Nathaniel Robinson. Hi, Steve. Do you think that ethnicity is becoming more of a personal problem for minorities? I am myself Mexican-American and Jewish. Often crimes by Latinos are hyped up by the news, driving antagonism that brings insecurity to the entire community. Being able to pass in this regard, I am less affected than the other members of my family. Indeed, I have the privilege of being able to engage as I wish. I can draw attention to racism without people seeing me as a Mexican American. However, I look very Jewish, and I identify more closely with being Jewish. Over the last few years, several prominent men of Jewish descent have been accused of being sexual predators. One of the most persistent anti-Semitic tropes is that of the Jewish sexual deviant who will weaken the health of the nation through reproduction. 10 years ago, I would have been unconcerned if charges were made against an Epstein or a Weinstein, but I am increasingly worried that such events will look bad for me. I don't think that people of English or Scottish or German descent would worry about crimes committed by people with names like their own. They are confident no one will call them out. Conversely, I feel that I am also feeding the hysteria by recoiling whenever I see other Jews failing publicly. I am afraid we are entering an era when people will try to hide who they are rather than celebrate it. Thanks. Yeah, those are all valid concerns, unfortunately. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Jewish people are still people who are perceived as being Jewish are still read and considered by many non-Jews as being an out group. and Scottish people and German people, et cetera, are read as white and aren't considered an outgroup in this country, and that's a shame. I hope it doesn't lead to people being afraid to identify who they are, because that's not the way to solve the problem. Like the way to solve the problem is for people to get over their racism and their prejudice and their clinging to stereotypes. But whenever we figure out how to do that and we commit to it, I'll let you know. Here's one from Matthew Zeidman. Hi, Steve, longtime viewer, first-time patron. Thank you for the excellent work you do exposing and calling out white supremacy and other forms of hatred and intolerance. We need more people like you standing up and unapologetically sounding the alarm. I actually have a question about the ethics of Star Trek, specifically The Next Generation. In the episode Pen Pals, Dr. Pulaski erases the short-term memory of a young alien from a pre-warp civilization whom Data saved from a geological disaster. Data questions whether Dr. Pulaski is doing the right thing by robbing her of her memories, to which Dr. Pulaski responds that leaving her memory intact would complicate her future, and that she has to be the person she was born to be. In future episodes, Dr. Crusher unsuccessfully attempts to wipe the short-term memories of aliens in similar situations using Dr. Pulaski's method. The writers seem comfortable with this as the ethical thing to do, as it's not portrayed as gray or debatable. But aren't sentient, intelligent life forms entitled to bodily autonomy regardless of how technologically advanced they are? What right does Dr. Pulaski, Dr. Crusher, or anyone else in Starfleet have to remove their memories without consent, or to decide what life path any individual is born to take? This seems to be a very paternalistic view. In Who Watches the Watchers, we get a good example of how things can go wrong when Starfleet personnel accidentally reveal themselves and their technology to a less advanced civilization. But again, is attempting to violate a sentient being's bodily autonomy the ethical solution? Do two wrongs make a right? In that case, no, I don't think they do. And I think that's a good example of times where I do think the ethics exhibited by the characters of Star Trek and the writers of Star Trek kind of fall a little short, because you're right, there is a bodily autonomy argument to be made there. And even though the thing is, it makes things easier for Starfleet. Dr. Pulaski says to Data, well, it makes things easier for her because then she doesn't remember all of this and she can be the person that she would have been if we had never interfered. But the truth is, you're making things easier for Starfleet because then you get to say, well, we didn't violate our rule, or we did violate our rule, but we fixed it. You know, the beneficiary of wiping the person's memory is the people on the Enterprise, is the Federation, is Starfleet, not necessarily them. I'm glad you brought up consent too, because I think a lot of the problem could be resolved if there was a scene where Dr. Pulaski or Dr. Crusher or whomever had a conversation with the person from the less advanced culture. And they said, look, we have this procedure that if it works, will wipe your memory of having ever met us, and we can just put you back on your planet and your life will go on like this never happened. Is that something you want to do? Then they can say, yes, I want to do that. I want to forget about this. Or they can say, no, I don't want you wiping my memories. I'll deal with this some other way. And then that's the way you do it. But yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really, really, really good point of Starfleet officers in Star Trek who are usually paragons of virtue, doing something that to me is unambiguously unethical, but selling it like it's the right thing to do and it's the best thing to do for them, when actually it's the best thing to do for Starfleet. So that was the last of the patron questions. Thanks to everybody for submitting those. And now I'm going to spend the last 20 minutes or so of the show answering questions from the live chat. So hello, folks in the live chat. If you have been sitting on questions this whole time that you want to ask me, you want me to talk about, now is the time to ask your questions in the live chat, and we'll do that for the rest of the show. Oh, Jamie, you submitted a question and I didn't get to it. Let me go check. Let me see if I can find Jamie's question. And I will answer it right now. Yeah, usually, sorry for the hiccup here for all of you in the live chat who are throwing out your questions. I saw a couple of super chats that I'll get to real quick as soon as I answer Jamie's question. Okay, so Jamie's question is, hey, Steve, one interesting thing I have noticed about attempts to regulate firearms in the United States is that efforts always seem to result in vulnerable folks like racial minorities, disabled folks, neurodivergent folks, queer folks, and the like, but never seem to impact white supremacists. This makes me, as a queer enby, pretty hesitant to support any firearms regulation, as they tend to make me and people I love less safe, while not really making those who would hurt us less dangerous. Your thoughts? I think you're right on the money. I think that is something that unfortunately aren't that's not brought up in these discussions a lot, and that's why I think mentioning not just the gun problem but the white supremacy problem is so important, because if you pass gun regulation that disproportionately affects vulnerable people and doesn't affect white people as much, when white people are the ones who are, for the most part, the mass shooters, that's something that you need to account for. So yes, I think that's something that needs to be a part of the conversation always going forward, and it never is, and I think that's a really good point. I got a super chat from John Burns. Your answer to John Brockman melting all of the guns is because you want less death to occur. Then you push for the Trumps, even Barron's deaths. I prefer you would remain consistent. Well, I am consistent. I'm just saying, look, my position, and thank you for the super chat, by the way. My position is I'm not telling anybody to go out and kill anybody or do any kind of violence. I have never told anybody to do that. I've never recommended that. I've never consciously incited or endorsed anything like that. All I'm saying is when shitty things happen to shitty people, I'm not sorry. So if one of the Trumps happened to trip and fall into a pot of molten guns, I do not see myself being upset by that. I don't think I would care. Now, Barron, because Barron's just a kid, okay, we'll leave Barron out of it. Maybe he can still grow up and be a decent person. In fact, hey, if his parents take a dive into a molten pot of melted guns, that's probably Barron's best shot at growing up to be a decent person. So we'll leave Barron out of it. But the rest of them, if they happen to trip and fall into a cauldron of melted guns and go all Terminator at the end, I'm not going to cry about it. I'm probably going to sleep like a baby that night. David Colby, super chat. Thank you very much. Let me see. Hi, Leto. I see Leto Anor is here. If you hear that squeaky door, that's the cat coming in and out of the room. She can't decide whether she wants in or out. Okay, from Pedro R. Noguera. Socath, his eyes uncovered. Steve, what alien race from Trek is your favorite? What Starfleet uniform has the best design in your opinion? Temba at rest. Thank you, sir. You are awesome. Okay. Favorite alien race? I guess I would have to say probably Klingons are my favorite. And uniform, my favorite uniforms are the Star Trek 2 through Star Trek 6 movie uniforms. The red ones, the red tunics with the belts and the shoulder clasp. I love those red movie uniforms. Another super chat from John Burns. Thank you very much. And you do see Dr. Babylon's when viewing the call for questions. Yeah, I checked it right before I went on the air, and I didn't see it. Maybe he changed it very late because I didn't see Jamie's question either. So maybe I should have checked it before I went on the air. Maybe he changed it at the last minute, but I checked it a few minutes before and I did not see it. So, but thank you. And Dr. Babylon, I apologize if I didn't see your question. Let me see. And as always, I apologize for missing questions in the live chat because I'm kind of scrolling through a bunch of stuff here. Miguel Ocampo, say, Shives, do you think the Democrats will impeach Trump now? One supporter sending bombs is one thing, but one killing innocents because Trump said we're being invaded is downright insane. I agree. I'm still not going to, I read in the Washington Post today that the Democrats have actually begun impeachment proceedings. I mean, like they've begun the process. They're not voting to impeach him or anything, but they've begun the investigative process that could eventually lead to impeachment. I mean, I'm still not holding my breath. I don't think you should ever put too much on the guts of the Democratic Party, unfortunately. Just got a super chat from Twilord that says Americans not seeing Euro ethnicities must make Brexit even more confusing without intuitive English exceptionalism. PM thinks Scott shouldn't be PM and is offended my republic isn't subservient. Yeah, you're right. A lot of non-Europeans don't quite read the distinctions. And thank you very much for that super chat. Chris Clements, have I read the Cultureverse books? No. Aaron K., your thoughts on animal agriculture's role in accelerating global warming? I am led to believe that it plays a significant role, that agriculture does contribute in a significant way to climate change. I don't know for a fact. I'm not a climate scientist, but I've heard that before. So reforming agriculture you would think be an important part of preventing or ameliorating climate change. Weisbrot, what is ecotourism anyway? Okay, that's a joke in the new Stephen Stuffy video. I'm on the phone with somebody, I say, and the joke is supposed to be that I have called a sex line, right? It's a 976 number that used to belong to this Unsolved Mysteries ripoff show that Patrick Stewart hosted that now has been taken over as a sex line because it's a 976 number. And I say, what do you do? And the person says something that we can't hear. And then I say ecotourism? What, like taking vacations to rainforests? And then they correct me and they say, no, it's ecotourism. And ecotourism is like voyeurism, but with your ears. Voyeurism is when you have you have a fetish or a kink where you like to watch other people having sex. Ecotourism is when you listen to other people having sex. So that's what that is. And that's what that joke was. And I know it was a great joke because I had to explain it. Scott G. Steve, independent of the whole DS9 controversy, what do you think of Babylon 5? I thought Babylon 5 was a great show. I thought it was a terrific show. I don't like it as much as Deep Space Nine. I don't like it as much as Star Trek in general. And it hasn't stayed with me as much. But I thought Babylon 5 was terrific. Andrew Priest, do you think there's any place at all for gun ownership, or would a blanket ban be best? Well, there's a difference. I mean, in principle, I would love to see just a blanket ban. In principle, I don't see any reason why anybody needs to have a gun. Maybe you could make some exceptions for farmers or subsistence hunters, but generally speaking, I don't think there's any reason why anybody in the United States, any private citizen, has to own a gun. But practically speaking, a total gun ban probably wouldn't work because there are just so goddamn many guns out there right now. You can't just say, okay, no more guns, because there's hundreds of millions of them out there right now. But yeah, if I could wave a magic wand and say no more guns and nobody's allowed to have them anymore, I think that's my preferred solution. But I don't think that's practical in the current environment. Oh yeah, Dave, your super chat was empty. I didn't see the question. So if you've posted the question a little bit later, I will try to answer it. Oh, Carlisle the Cinephile, did you see the cosplays Blair Imani did where she incorporated her hijab into a Starfleet uniform? Do you think we'll ever see something like that in an actual series? Yeah, and I thought those looked great, by the way. I thought she looked terrific. Those were really cool costumes. Yeah, maybe. I would kind of like to see that. I mean, Discovery seemed to hint that religion does still exist on Earth, even though it doesn't seem to be nearly as prominent in the 23rd century. Captain Pike seemed to know something about church and have some kind of religious background. So I suppose it's possible that there are still some people on Earth, even though you get the impression that it is a largely secular, non-religious society. You get, there could still be Christians, and there could still be Muslims, and there could still be Muslims who wear the hijab. So yeah, I think that would be terrific if they did that on Star Trek. I don't know if we'll see it or not, but I think it would be fine. I would like to see it. Phoenix Flosion, as many old wrestlers are exposed as problematic, Hogan, Flair, Dusty, etc., should we take the separate the art from the artist approach, or are there issues too big to separate? I think it depends on the wrestler and it depends on the issues. Hogan, I thought, was an asshole before I even knew he was a racist, because I just thought Hogan was an asshole. So there you go. But, someone like Flair or Dusty, where, it's a little bit more complicated. Yeah, maybe separate the art from the artist is a better way to handle it. But as I say, when in all of these kinds of issues, it's up to you as the individual to decide where to draw those lines. If you think that Hogan being a racist doesn't prevent you from enjoying his matches, then that's the decision that you make. And me thinking he's a prick, whether he's a racist or not, is a decision I make. Ram22, what do you think of Miles O'Brien's miraculous ability to get over trauma? Yeah, but all Starfleet officers have that ability. It's just that Miles, we see Miles experiencing a lot more trauma than a lot of other people. Oh, and David, I see you're wanting to clarify that when you say DS9 stole things from B5, they both took similar ideas and then spun them. Yeah, and that's kind of what I think. That's kind of what I think. I don't think that Deep Space Nine was a ripoff of Babylon 5, but is there a lot of commonality between them? Yeah, sure. Andrew Priest, would you do a Trek actually about the Romulans? I think they're the most interesting race in Trek. Yeah, maybe at some point. There's potential there. Ooh, another super chat from John Burns. Thank you again. Is it possible that many of our problems today are because billions of people live free from invasion by their neighbors, leading to debates via philosophy and theology? Has the pen truly triumphed over the sword? That's one way to put it. I think a lot of what you're describing is a form of privilege. I think I think. Yeah, the fact that we live free from invasion, just like the fact that white people live free from racism, that men live free from sexism, we are more able to treat these things as intellectual puzzles than real world issues. So yeah, I think that definitely is a part of it. Carlisle the Cinephile, tomorrow is your birthday. Well, happy birthday, Carlisle, and hopefully you've gotten a lot of, yes, I see now, you've gotten love in the super chat, or you've gotten love in the chat. Some random geek says, I thought economics is outside your wheelhouse. You mentioned that every time someone asks you a question about socialism, have you studied up on it? Are you a socialist? I have studied up on economics a little tiny bit for this Star Trek video I'm doing for next week, but I would still not call myself anywhere near an expert. And in fact, I make that point in the video. That, this video would probably be a lot better and a lot more interesting if I had a firmer grasp of economics. Jefferson Wright, is there a specific state government you find much better or worse than all the other ones in the country? I can't say. I've only ever lived in Maryland, and Maryland's state government certainly has its problems, but it also is pretty good in a lot of ways too. But I've never lived in another state, so I can't really say. From Mirjam Tangay, do you watch any alternative media such as the Young Turks or David Pakman? Not really. I've watched the Young Turks occasionally. I might watch a Young Turks video or like a Michael Brooks video every once in a while, but not regularly, no. Nick Spitz, tiny quick question. What is that hat? That is a Hagerstown Suns hat. The Hagerstown Suns are my local single A baseball team. Trance, what's your favorite remake of an original film? That would be probably Werner Herzog's Nosferatu, one of my favorite movies. And the original by F.W. Murnau is one of my favorite movies as well. Nathaniel Robinson, have you imagined what episode 2, season 8 of DS9 would be like? No. I thought their breakdown of episode 1 in the documentary was quite interesting, but now I have not thought about what episode 2 about. That's episode 2 is when Cisco is there, right? Cisco has come back. Here's another super chat from Twilord. Thank you again. Random downer time. Too many of my English friends have talked about Britain's history to me, like Garrick did Cardassia's when reading casualty reports. Yeah, okay. that is kind of a downer, isn't it? Here's another one from John Burns. Thank you again. I can't beat you up for your opinion. Pen or sword? You mean like which do I prefer? Obviously I would prefer the pen because I think I'm a lot better with a pen than with a sword, but I think there are circumstances where unfortunately the sword is the better choice. But overall, yeah, I prefer the pen. Miguel Ocampo says, word of advice, never read the comment section. My comment section is actually pretty good because I moderate it. But generally speaking, I think that's good advice, yes. A-Trance, who would you vote for if you lived in the UK? I don't know enough about it to have a strong opinion. Andrew Priest, do you think there's any chance that Slur Bungle Trump, I try not to say that word anymore, sorry, could win a second term? I'm thinking of revoking your independence if you're not going to use it properly. Please revoke our independence. Please come back and be the adults and help us get our act together. Although actually, the British need to get their act together first. And then they can come over and fix our shit. Yes, there is a chance he could get a second term. Because this is a fucked up country. And there's a very good chance he could get a second term. And it terrifies and frustrates me to no end. Even after all this, there are people, like he still has a base. He still has a base of support of people who think that he's doing a great job. So yes, there is a chance. I hope not. I'm going to do whatever little I can to help that not happen. I hope that it doesn't happen. But there is a chance that it could, yeah. And if that does happen, please revoke our independence. I, as an American, am giving you permission to come back and reassert colonial control. 255 AD, how do you feel about Bernie agreeing to go on Joe Rogan's show? Is getting the progressive message to more people worth giving Rogan more mainstream legitimacy? No. I don't think that Sanders should have gone on Joe Rogan's show. I don't think that anybody should go on Joe Rogan's show. Rogan is not as bad as some people who are a little further to the right than him, but he provides a platform for people. He is a gateway to far right politics and to white supremacy and anti-feminism and all this and conspiracy theories, because he himself is a conspiracy theorist. So no, I don't think that Sanders should have gone on Joe Rogan's podcast. I mean, hopefully some good comes out of it. If more people are open to voting for a progressive candidate than were otherwise, I think that's great. But no, as a rule, I don't think that I do not think that they should. I know, John, imperialism is bad. Another super chat from Twilord. Thank you very much again. Their current plan is to apply for statehood. 255 AD. Why don't you like Lore Reloaded? He made it sound like you hate him for no reason, but I've learned not to trust anybody explanations of why you don't like him. I don't hate him. I unfollowed him on Twitter recently, or relatively recently, like in the last couple of. Now that here's the cat to talk to me. What do you want? Go bother your mother. I unfollowed him on Twitter a few months ago because he posted some political stuff that I just thought was over the line. And I just said, okay, that's enough of that. But I mean, I don't hate him. I don't have any personal animosity towards him. We've gotten along personally in the past. We never had a falling out. He just posted some shit on Twitter that that I thought was not something I wanted to follow or support anymore. So I unfollowed him, but I don't have any particular animosity toward him. John Brockman, why do you hate white people? It's self-loathing mostly. Phoenix Explosion. Yes, I have seen the video of Werner Herzog being shot during an interview and not being fazed at all. Yes, I have seen that, and that is an awesome video. This cat, I swear to God. What do you want? You should at least come in here and say hi to everybody. Here, she's being such a pest. Let me see if I can get her to come in and say hi to. Adi, come here. Adi, come here. Yeah, bring her in. I mean, she's making noise anyway. I might as well. No, I'm still on the air. I just want to show her to people. Come here. This is not going to work, but come here. Come here, baby. Come to Papa. Come here, sweetheart. This is riveting broadcasting. Here, I'm going to go get her. Hang on. Come here, sweetheart. Come here, sweetheart. Oh, yeah. You already fed her, right? You loud, rude motherfucker. There she is. Look, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. No. This won't do it all. This won't do it all. No. Thank you, John, for the super chat. I'll get to you as soon as I'm done cuddling the kitty. There. Now everybody can see you. Everybody say hi to Audie. Say hi to everybody. Yes. Yeah, I know. Well, you wanted in here. You kept throwing the door open and coming in. You kept throwing the door open and coming in, and then you would just walk right out. And you were really getting on my nerves. Because I'm trying to do a show here. Yeah. This is a very professional operation. I know, and you're just fucking it up. I know. Okay, go ahead. So that was Audie. Oh, yes, and it is International Cat Day. How about that? I didn't even think about that. Now she's leaving, and, yeah, and she'll probably be back in about 10 seconds. By the way, do you like my door closing technology? It's my door closing technology when she opens the door, so I can, because it's right over there, but it's a little further for me to reach. All right, so I apologize for I know I missed a lot of people's questions, and the cat interruption didn't help, but John Burns, thank you for the other super chat. The pen is now greater than the sword because people can comment on the actions and politics of others immediately. Everyone can read and respond. And as far as I know, people can't punch others. That's a very good point. Yes, every day is International Cat Day, Leto Anna. I agree. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm past the time I usually try to wrap these up. So, David says there's a problem with the live chat. I keep putting my hand up against the screen to pet the kitty, but it's not working. I'm sorry about that. I'll give her a scritch for you when I get done here. I'm going to wrap this up. So if you asked a question in the live chat and I didn't get to it, I really apologize. It's nothing personal. It's just the time ran out and I was distracted by a cat, and sometimes the chat goes by really fast. So nothing personal if I missed your question. I apologize for that. And I want to remind everybody, first of all, check out the charity links in the description. I mentioned those already for our friend Phoenix, and there are links to some of our other friends as well who need some help, who are having some rough financial times. If you can help out at all, please consider doing that. The links to those are in the description of the video. I also want to remind you that if you enjoy the work that I do, you can support me by becoming a supporter on Patreon, which many of you already are, patreon.com/Steve Shives. And the main benefit where this show is concerned is if you are a patron, you can submit a question ahead of time that I will answer on the show. So that way you can make sure that you get your question answered and you won't have to worry about me hopefully seeing it in the live chat as it scrolls by. And also, in addition to the YouTube stuff, I am the co-host of a couple of really awesome podcasts with my buddy Jason Harding. They are part of the Let Me Listen family of podcasts. I am the co-host of Late Seating, the movie review podcast. Our new episode of that went up last week, where we reviewed Taxi Driver. And I'm also the co-host of the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek-themed comedy podcast, where we play low-ranking officers on a certain famous Federation starship that is embarking on a certain legendary 5-year mission. And the new episode of that just dropped today. So if you really like my YouTube stuff, and especially if you like the Star Trek stuff, and you haven't listened to the Ensign's Log, listen to the Ensign's Log. The links are in the description for that as well. You can subscribe via RSS, or you can just listen at the website, letmelistenpodcasts.com. That's it for me, everybody. Thank you so much for bearing with me for this once again. My apologies once again to people who asked questions that I didn't get to. Thanks to all of you for being here, for being in the chat, for asking questions, for being patrons. Those of you who are patrons, I appreciate you so much. And I will see you in 2 weeks to do this again. So thanks for watching. Take care, everybody.